Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The airport was bustling, as usual, a mix of suitcases, flight announcements, and hurried passengers. Among them, Amelia Johnson walked with a calm, confident gait, her beige coat perfectly tailored, her elegant leather handbag slung over her shoulder. Every gesture exuded a quiet confidence, forged by years of hard work and success in a world that had too often closed doors to her. She headed toward the first-class boarding area, unaware that not all eyes were on her out of simple curiosity. Some passengers eyed her with interest, others with suspicion. But only one gaze was full of contempt, that of Richard Caldwell, a wealthy, arrogant white man sitting in a chair near the gate. His face displayed barely contained anger and a sense of superiority. In his mind, Amelia didn't belong here. To him, she had disrupted the natural order he believed to be immutable. Amelia felt his gaze, but continued on her way with dignity. She knew this type of person, those who believed the world should belong to them. She knew that her only weapon would be calm, patience, and the strength of her convictions. As passengers began to board, an invisible tension was building. The murmur of travelers, the sound of suitcases on the tiled floor, and the buzz of announcements created an almost electric atmosphere. Amelia placed her ticket on the flight attendant's counter, ready to take her seat. But behind her, Richard Caldwell's racism and arrogance would soon erupt into a public confrontation. This supposedly ordinary flight would become the scene of unforgettable humiliation and revenge. A lesson in dignity, courage, and the price of underestimating someone because of their skin color. Amelia Johnson gently adjusted her jacket as she entered the boarding bridge. Ticket in hand, she headed toward first class, each step measured, each movement imbued with calm and assurance. Around her, passengers exchanged surprised glances, seeing her alone, elegant and confident, seemed to unsettle some. A few meters away, Richard Caldwell abruptly stood up from his seat. He squinted as he saw Amelia advance. "What's she doing here?" he muttered to himself, but loud enough for several people to hear. When Amelia reached the flight attendants, Richard quickly approached. "Excuse me," he snapped, his voice betraying anger and arrogance. "This seat is mine." "I don't see why this," he trailed off, searching for a word without obviously offending the other passengers. "No one should be here." Amelia slowly turned her head towards him, her gaze calm but piercing. "Sir," she said gently but firmly, "I have paid for my ticket and my seat is reserved. Please respect that." Richard frowned. "You're not supposed to be in first class. I'm a regular passenger and I know the rules. You should get off immediately." Around them, the murmurs of the passengers grew louder. Some discreetly picked up their phones to film, intrigued by the exchange. Amelia took a deep breath. She knew giving in now would be humiliating. "I assure you, sir," she replied calmly, "I am exactly where I need to be." Richard, red with anger, called the flight attendant. "Get her out," he ordered. "She doesn't belong here." A flight attendant approached, polite but firm. "Sir, we need proof before asking a passenger to leave their seat." "Madam, can you show us your ticket and travel documents?" Amelia pulled out her phone and presented the necessary information, confirming that her reservation was legitimate and that her presence in first class was perfectly authorized. Richard stepped back slightly, surprised and irritated. He hadn't expected the woman he was trying to humiliate to be perfectly legal. Eyes turned toward him, tension rose, and a question began to arise in the passengers' minds: who would really be humiliated at the end of this flight? Amelia had barely sat down when Richard Caldwell, flushed with anger, took a few steps down the aisle to approach her. His hands were shaking slightly, a sign that his arrogance was beginning to waver in the face of an unexpected obstacle. "You know what?" he snapped, his voice betraying irritation and contempt. "You shouldn't even be sitting here. First class is for real customers, not, well, you know." Amelia looked up at him, her expression calm but firm. "Mr. Caldwell, first class doesn't belong to anyone in particular. I paid for my ticket like any other passenger. I suggest you respect the rules and the cabin crew. Richard raised his voice, I'm asking you to leave this place. I can call security if necessary. At that moment, several passengers turned toward them, some whispering, others discreetly taking out their phones to film. The atmosphere in the cabin became electric. Amelia remained motionless, her gaze clear and steady, showing that she would not back down. One of the flight attendants approached them, polite but firm. Mr. Caldwell, we cannot ask a passenger to vacate their seat without legal proof or an invalid ticket. Madam, can you confirm your reservation? Amelia calmly took out her phone and showed her booking confirmation. As you can see, everything is in order. I urge you to respect the cabin crew and the company's rules. Richard felt a wave of humiliation rise within him. The whispers around him grew louder, and he noticed several passengers looking at him with disapproval. He frowned and took a step back, realizing that his plan for domination was beginning to fail. Amelia, for her part, showed no signs of weakness. She knew exactly how to turn the situation to her advantage if Richard continued to insist. Her calmness contrasted with the arrogant man's visible agitation. The passengers silently took sides without knowing it. Richard, unable to remain silent, muttered to himself in frustration, this can't be, how can she stay so calm? And it was at that precise moment that the plane began to taxi towards the runway, sealing their confrontation for takeoff and foreshadowing a battle of dignity and arrogance at high altitude. The plane was now airborne, the roar of the engines filling the cabin. Amelia sat calmly, watching Richard Caldwell seethe with impatience a few seats away. His anger had only grown, but he was beginning to feel like he was missing something. He stood up again, unable to contain himself. This isn't over. I can't believe you're sitting here. His voice betrayed frustration mixed with inner panic. The passengers, some discreetly, continued to film the exchange, intrigued by the scene. Amelia picked up her phone and answered an incoming video call. The flight attendants watched, curious but attentive. On the screen appeared an elegant man, the airline's CEO. Amelia, everything is in order. You have the reserved seat on this flight as a strategic partner. Richard, who was looking over Amelia's shoulder, suddenly paled. His mouth hung open for a moment in disbelief. He had just realized that he had tried to humiliate someone who actually held greater power than he did. Amelia, without raising her voice, gave him a piercing look. Mr. Caldwell, I think you underestimated this situation. I am exactly where I need to be, and nothing you do will change that. Around them, the passengers, aware of the reversal, exchanged surprised and admiring glances. Richard felt his arrogance crumble under the weight of the stares and whispers. He had wanted to impose his authority through racism and fear, but everything was turning against him. Amelia silently leaned back against the seat, a small smile on her lips. She didn't need to shout, violently defend herself, or engage in aggressive confrontation. Her calm, her legitimacy, and her mastery of the situation were enough to humiliate the man who thought he could dominate through fear and racism. Richard, alone and flushed with shame, realized too late that his behavior had not only made him look ridiculous in front of all the passengers, but that he had just sealed his own public humiliation. The flight continued, but now Amelia held invisible control of the cabin. Richard was nothing more than a spectator to his own defeat. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The passengers, initially silent, began to whisper among themselves, discussing what they had just witnessed. Some discreetly took out their phones to film the scene. The tension in the air was palpable, every movement of Richard Caldwell and every calm gesture of Amelia Johnson were scrutinized closely. Richard, flushed with anger and humiliation, tried to regain the initiative. Does no one here respect me? He said in a trembling but strong voice. This woman doesn't belong. A man sitting nearby, an executive in a gray suit, shook his head and muttered, this is ridiculous, she paid for her seat, she has all her papers, and you're acting like a child. Amelia, still calm, looked Richard straight in the eye and said, Mr. Caldwell, you can scream all you want, it won't change anything. I paid for my ticket, I have a right to be here, and I'm not leaving. The passengers' murmurs became more audible, some openly indignant. A woman, sitting directly behind Richard, intervened. "Sir, she's fine. You should calm down before creating an unnecessary scandal." Richard, frustrated, moved a little further forward, but he felt the collective gaze of all the passengers bearing down on him. Their phones pointed at him, their disdainful faces, all of this put him in a situation he had never imagined. Amelia, aware of the effect her mere presence and calmness had on her, smiled slightly. Her quiet confidence made her the central figure. She had nothing to prove through violence or anger. Her dignity was enough to turn the tables. Richard took a step back, his hands clenched on the back of the seat, feeling the moment approaching when he would lose complete control. Every whisper and every glance from the cabin was a blow to his arrogance. He had wanted to humiliate, but now he was the one being humiliated. And in that tense silence, Amelia understood that she now held the true power, the respect and implicit admiration of all the passengers around her. As the plane broke through the clouds, Richard Caldwell stood, flushed with anger and humiliation. His attempts to intimidate Amelia had failed, and now all eyes were on him. Every passenger seemed to be silently supporting Amelia, and this made him even more furious. Amelia, on the other hand, remained seated with grace and composure. She discreetly checked her phone, then looked up at Richard. "Mr. Caldwell, I advise you to sit down and calm down. Your behavior is attracting everyone's attention and could become problematic for you." Richard almost broke down at the words. "How dare you speak to me like that?" he yelled, his trembling hands gripping the back of the seat. "I'm a regular customer. I pay for this service." A flight attendant, who had been polite but in the background until then, approached, this time firmly. "Mr. Caldwell, you must cease your interventions immediately. If you do not sit down and comply with the rules, we will be forced to contact security upon landing." Richard stammered, unable to come up with an appropriate retort. He realized that not only had he failed to intimidate Amelia, but he had also made a fool of himself in front of all the passengers and cabin crew. The silence around him was crushing, every glance weighing like a silent judgment. Amelia, with a slight smile, replied calmly, "You see, Mr. Caldwell, it never helps to underestimate someone. Respect is earned through actions, not fear or arrogance." Richard finally sat down, his head bowed, red with shame. The passengers, now curious and amused, exchanged admiring glances and murmurs. Amelia hadn't done anything extraordinary, just demonstrated her dignity and inner strength, and that was enough to turn the tide. The flight continued, but the dynamic had completely changed. Amelia had become the invisible center of respect and admiration in the cabin. Richard, on the other hand, was merely a spectator to his own humiliation. The plane was now flying above the clouds, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere was electric. Richard Caldwell, still flushed with anger and shame, no longer knew how to behave. He had lost all control in the face of Amelia, who, for her part, maintained an almost insolent calm. Amelia, without raising her voice, took out her phone and checked a message. She knew it was time for a subtle reminder of her importance. A few moments later, she pretended to answer a call from an airline employee. Her voice was clear and professional, and every word she spoke captured Richard's attention. "Yes, everything is ready for the strategy presentation. Please confirm that everything is in order." Richard, curious and worried, looked up to see who was on the other end of the conversation. He suddenly realized that this woman he had wanted to humiliate was not just a passenger, she was actually a strategic partner of the airline. Her first-class reservation was not only legitimate, it was priority and official. Around them, passengers began to notice the changes in Richard's demeanor. Some exchanged amused glances, guessing that Amelia had a more important role than they thought. The murmurs turned into admiring whispers. Amelia put down her phone and looked at Richard calmly. "You see, Mr. Caldwell, sometimes we think we can intimidate others with anger and arrogance, but the reality is often quite different." Richard felt even more humiliated. His intimidation plan had failed, and now he understood that not only had he failed, but he had exposed his own arrogance to all the passengers. Every discreet smile, every admiring glance toward Amelia was an additional sting in his wounded pride. Amelia silently savored this small victory. She hadn't shouted, hadn't forced the situation. Her dignity, patience, and calm had been enough to completely reverse the power dynamic. Richard Caldwell, arrogant and racist, had just learned a lesson he would never forget. The flight continued, but it was now clear to everyone, Amelia was no mere passenger, and Richard was nothing more than a helpless spectator of his own humiliation. The plane finally landed, and the passengers began to stand to retrieve their belongings. Amelia, always calm and elegant, stood up as well, calmly picking up her purse. Richard Caldwell, meanwhile, tried to hide his frustration and shame, but his face betrayed every thought of rage and humiliation. As they exited the plane, a surprise awaited all the passengers. Several limousines were parked on the tarmac, and a small group of photographers and journalists were waiting, cameras at the ready. The passengers exchanged surprised glances, curious to know who the special guest was. Richard, initially confident, smiled proudly, thinking all the fuss was about him. But his smile instantly faded when Amelia, walking calmly, became the center of attention. Photographers took pictures of her, reporters greeted her respectfully, and some passengers even bowed slightly in admiration. Amelia gracefully climbed into one of the limousines, completely ignoring Richard. Standing on the tarmac, Richard realized that he had not only failed to humiliate Amelia, but had also exposed himself to public shame in front of all those present. The passengers and the reporters present had eyes only for her. A murmur ran through the group, "She's impressive. I can't believe he dared." Richard felt completely humiliated, every word a silent indictment of his arrogance and racism. Amelia silently smiled politely at the cabin crew and passengers who were looking at her with admiration. She had just transformed what they intended to be a humiliation into a dazzling demonstration of her dignity and achievement. Richard, alone on the tarmac, flushed with shame, finally understood that underestimating someone because of their skin color or appearance could be very costly. The lesson was bitter, and he had no one to blame but himself. A few hours after landing, Amelia Johnson agreed to an exclusive interview with several journalists on the tarmac. The cameras were focused on her, while Richard Caldwell, humiliated and scorned, remained in the background, invisible in the shadow of his own arrogance. "Ms. Johnson," asked a reporter, "how did you keep your cool in the face of such hostility?" Amelia smiles slightly, her clear, steady gaze fixed on the camera. "Dignity isn't shouted, it's shown. In the face of arrogance and injustice, staying true to yourself is the greatest strength. The prejudices of others don't matter, what matters are our actions and our integrity." Journalists, impressed by her calm demeanor, took note of every word. Cameras continued to roll, and the videos were quickly shared on social media. Within hours, thousands of views and comments had poured in, praising her courage and poise. Some internet users wrote, "She gave a real lesson to all those who think that skin color determines a person's worth." Others commented, "This is how you handle an arrogant racist with elegance and intelligence." Meanwhile, Richard Caldwell learned that the video had gone viral. His once confident face was now associated with arrogance and public humiliation. Each new share of the video deepened his shame and reminded everyone how badly he had failed to assert his power through racism. Amelia, for her part, received numerous messages of support, not only for her dignity in the face of confrontation, but also for the inspiring message she had just conveyed to the world. She had transformed a moment of potential humiliation into a shining example of courage and moral strength. And for Richard, the lesson was clear: underestimating someone because of their skin color could backfire in a public and irreparable way. The day was drawing to a close, but the echoes of what had just happened still resonated in the minds of all those who had witnessed the scene. Amelia Johnson, now known to all the passengers and thousands of online viewers, climbed into her limousine with a serenity that contrasted with Richard Caldwell's utter confusion. Sitting on the tarmac, Richard watched the limousine disappear, aware that he had just lost far more than the battle on an airplane. His pride was shattered, his arrogance exposed to the world. The looks of those who had watched him that day were already haunting him. Every passenger had witnessed his failed attempt at humiliation and its resounding failure. Amelia, for her part, remained silent, savoring her victory not through revenge, but through dignity. She had shown that true strength was not measured by anger or economic power, but by the ability to remain self-controlled in the face of injustice. In the days that followed, the video of the incident went viral on social media. Thousands of people shared its message: respect and dignity always trump arrogance and racism. Comments poured in. She is the perfect example of what it means to stay strong and dignified. This is how you deal with an arrogant person without ever losing your cool. Richard Caldwell, publicly humiliated, became a symbol of arrogance punished by social justice. He faced professional consequences and the shame of his peers. Amelia, for her part, continued her journey, not only physically but also morally, carrying with her a universal lesson: dignity and courage are the most powerful weapons against injustice. Her calm, patience, and intelligence had transformed a moment of confrontation into a memorable triumph. And so, this banal theft, which could have been marked by humiliation and anger, turned into a shining lesson: underestimating someone because of their skin color or appearance can be very costly, while respect and self-control build true greatness.